Technomancer, creator of Crossroads, and this should be the final video on Technomancy in the mod. Now in this video we're going to talk about all the machines in Technomancy that interact with the Temporal Entropy mechanic. So to start, I'm going to say Temporal Entropy is a mechanic that is designed to be scary. It has the ability to create a lot of damage in your world very quickly, and small mistakes can have catastrophic repercussions. Now, this is very much configurable. I'm going to suggest that if you're concerned by this, that you go into the config settings and turn on, I believe the option is called Entropy Safe Mode or something similar to that. It'll be under the Technomancy category of this configs, and if you do that, everything will be completely safe. There are also options to make it not safe but decrease the severity, so those act as a middle ground. But now for the purpose of this tutorial, I have actually enabled the safe mode because I am going to be acting quite quickly and trying to show off a lot of things very quickly, and I'm going to be honestly quite sloppy, and I'd rather not destroy everything by mistake. But normally things would be a lot more dangerous that I'm going to show off. Okay. Now the first thing we're going to show off is copshoium, or more specifically how you make it. Copshoium is this orange metal which has been used in a lot of recipes for Technomancy, and it also makes very good gears, as we showed in the previous video. But in order to make it, you need this machine called a copshoium imbuer. Now, first of all, the machine actually makes molten copshoium, which you can cool into ingots in a fluid cooling chamber like it were any other molten metal. So we really want to look at the recipe for molten copshoium, and we see that they're all in this copshoium imbuer. Now there's three different ways, others may be added. I don't really want to focus on the recipes too much. As always, you can check JEI, but we're going to look at this one that says that's molten copper to molten copshoium. The reason we're going to look at this one is that all the other recipes say produces temporal entropy. Now, temporal entropy is a mechanic we're going to get to. As I said, this video is going to be all the machines that interact with it, but all the ways to handle temporal entropy require copshoium. So at least initially, we're going to need to use this recipe to get our first few batches of copshoium. So the copshoium imbuer produces molten copshoium from liquids when hit by a time beam, as it says on the tooltip. Now, this is, of course, a little bit of a puzzle. There's nothing in this mod that is super simple or quite what it seems initially, and Technomancy is a path very much about complexity, so of course this machine has a trick to it. Now, it has two fluid connections, the top and the bottom. Now, the bottom is the output. We'll get the molten copshoium out the bottom. That's the simple part. Nothing too fancy there. Copshoium comes out the bottom. The top is a little bit special because the top interacts with the input liquid, but unlike most machines where you can only put in to the input, in this machine we can put into the input and we can take out of the input. And we can actually use, with these pipes, we can actually set them to share liquid. Remember the setting for this where I can wrench it so that there's no little arrow and it will equalize the amount of liquid in the pipe and the machine? We can do that with the imbuer, and you're going to want to. The reason is that if I put, let's say, some molten copper in here, the capacity of this machine is not very much, and you're going to see that we just put 1,000 millibuckets of molten copper in here, and it's already almost full. Now, if you look at that recipe for the copshoium that we're about to do, 1 molten copper goes to 2 molten copshoium. We should be a little bit concerned by that because we're going to overfill this machine, right? If we craft this all at once, we're going to turn 1,000 millibuckets of molten copper into 2,000 of copshoium, and this thing can only hold, as you can see from the capacity there, 1,440 millibuckets. And that's more than just a waste. If we overfill the output, the machine breaks. And by breaks, I mean it will literally, well, I'll demonstrate. Now, this thing crafts everything it has in it when it gets a time beam. It does it all at once. Normally, you'd want like a beam, like an automated setup to produce a time beam. So that you could, do this consistently. But I'm just going to be using that beam staff we demoed a couple videos before as just a quick source of a time beam for convenience. And as you can see, the machine broke. It had more molten copper in it than it could possibly hold. That's what happens when it breaks. It destroys the machine, and this is molten copper spilling into the world. So what we really want to do is we want to fill it up to less than half full or less, and have the output be empty before we zap it with a time beam. Otherwise, we're in trouble. Does that make sense? I hope so. Now, that's why the ability for us to share liquid becomes important, because we can automate this if, for example, we used circuits to read how full this tank was, and as long as it's less than half full, because all the liquid's being shared, between all the inputs and outputs with this current setting on the pipe, if this tank is less than half full with this setting on the pipe, then we know that this is less than half full. So this is a case where you'd want to use circuits to control it. And we're going to put in a whole bunch more molten copper. Sure. Now again, I'm doing this manually for demo purposes. And now when we zap it, nothing broke, and the molten copper came out the bottom, and the next batch of copper has flowed in. Okay, so we did actually consume the copper. It consumed all of it. It's just that there was more in the pipe and tank, and this is gone back in. All right, and then this would probably go to a fluid cooling chamber or something, just to get the ingots out. So that's how we make our initial amounts of copper showing. To produce all the other recipes, which are much cheaper, if I look at the uses for this machine, hold on, you'll see that the copper recipe was kind of the most expensive one. We had to use molten metal to get copper, while these ones we can use water or lava. I mean, that's so much easier, or cheaper anyway. We don't have to spend copper on it, but produces temporal entropy, and we can't handle that yet. Okay. So now it's time to talk about temporal entropy. Now I'm going to build this whole setup again, not the entire thing, just the parts we actually care about, because this whole thing is overkill. Temporal entropy is like a negative energy system. Unlike normal power, where machines will consume power, and if they don't have enough they stop, temporal entropy, machines produce temporal entropy when they run, and if they fill up with temporal entropy, bad things happen. Let me demonstrate some of those bad things. Now, as I said, I disabled in the config the ability for machines to fail when they overfill with temporal entropy. I turned on safe mode. In safe mode, machines will not break or anything when they overfill. They'll just turn off until you get rid of the temporal entropy. They're safe. However, I can use a void time beam to manufacture the effects anyway, even with the config. So there's a wide variety of random disasters that can happen. You may recognize some of these. There's explosions. There's those flame clouds that can terraform stuff, just like the ones we made in Alchemy. There's a flame cloud that won't terraform but actually destroys blocks, like pure phlostogen. There's others. Oh, this one electrocutes you and would just kill you. There's a couple others where every time it looks like it's doing nothing, it's actually doing some beam effects, which would be real nasty in survival mode. I'm trying to get the one where it makes a destructive flame cloud, but I'm not getting... I don't want to say lucky. I guess I'm not getting sufficiently unlucky. It's pretty rare. Oh, there we go. So if that were to happen in the middle of the base, you would be real upset. So these are the sort of disasters that will happen every time this thing overfills, so temporal entropy, unless you've changed the config, is no laughing matter. So how do we deal with it? Well, there's only one way to destroy it. Only one. And that is we need an entropy sink. The good news is that this thing runs for free. It doesn't need power or anything, and it just destroys it. The bad news is it doesn't work on its own. Placed down like this, it won't work. It needs to be placed over a beacon. No beacon, no effect. Which means if you want to do stuff that involves temporal entropy, you need to have gotten access to nether stars so you can get a beacon. And we can tell it's working because it's just done that. Okay. There's also a noise. Not sure if you can hear that on the video. And this can be pretty much any height over the beacon. I just put it there because, I don't know, because I did. If I do this, you'll see that you can't have multiple, oh wait, hold on. You can have multiple of them, so you can stack them up on one beacon if you want. But we're not going to do that. Now, this thing has a limit on how much temporal entropy it can destroy. Like I said, it runs for free, but it does have its limits. It can only handle 256 temporal entropy per cycle. But what's a cycle? A cycle is exactly the same as those cycles we talked about with beams. Remember with beams, everything, like every reflector had a delay of one cycle. And a cycle is, and you saw there was a delay when traveling around, and if I had a loop of these, there would be like a time thing. Hopefully you recall how beams work. See if I do this right. I should be able to force it to do sort of a pulse and run as sort of a clock and really demonstrate what I'm trying to say. Now, a cycle, as you may recall from beams, is 2 redstone ticks, aka 4 game ticks, aka 1/5 of a second. So as you can see how beams act with like a time delay when they move of a 1/5 of a second, temporal entropy uses the exact same cycles. So these things destroy 256 temporal entropy per cycle at most. Now, how do we move it? How do we move the temporal entropy from our machine, our Kopshoyum imbuer, which is going to be making it, over to our entropy sink, which is going to be destroying it? We're going to use these. These are entropy nodes, and again, these use Kopshoyum to make, so you're going to need to craft your own first batches. We place one down, and we need to connect it. So we're going to use a linking tool. The Old Essentials linking tool we've used for all sorts of machines, and we can right-click on this as the start, and right-click here as the end, and now you can see that arrow showing us that everything is linked up properly. So now any temporal entropy in here is going to move there. And similarly, I want to link my machine to my node. These nodes can transfer through walls, and they can also transfer, so they can transfer through walls, no problem. They can transfer, I think, 16 blocks range. You'll know if it's out of range because it won't let you link. And we're just going to do something that involves that now. So if I clear out all the molten copper here, and let me actually just break and replace you. Relink that because I broke and replaced it. Okay. So this recipe, the one that uses distilled water, there is too much water in there. This is going to break. Let me take some out. At here. Okay, now we're safe. That should be safe. You'll recall this is going to produce some temporal entropy. Now, let me actually show you without the node, what will happen if we don't have a node there. So let me remove this link so that the entropy is just going to stay in this machine. So you see when I right-click, shift right-click it with my Omnimeter, it says 0 out 64 temporal entropy. So if we now give it a little zap so that it does the craft, it did the thing, we made some Kopshoyum, and if I look now, there is now a bunch of temporal entropy. The book tells you the formula for how much it makes. Basically, the bigger the batch, the more it makes, and we're 57.813% full. where we've got 37 out of 64. If this were to overfill, there would be a disaster. But we've got the config changed, so what would actually happen is this thing would just stop being able to craft. Now, if we link this, you're going to see exactly what happens. Now, that was a bit fast. Maybe you missed that, so we're going to do that again. And just keep an eye on the connection between the node and whatnot. And you just saw that little black sort of laser effect, same as these effects here, that showed temporal entropy was being transferred. Now, and it went to here where it was destroyed. Now, a few things to note. These things also have a limit. They can only store so much, and therefore they can only transfer so much. Try and get them to transfer more than 64 temporal entropy per cycle, and these things are going to overload. That would be bad. Also, these entropy nodes are not perfectly efficient. Every single node in a chain, every time they transfer, will produce a little bit of temporal entropy of their own. This is not free. Right? You can't just have a chain of hundreds of these because each one's going to add +2, and eventually you're going to have a problem. Now I'm going to manufacture a problem by putting a loop of these so that it just keeps going around getting +2, +2, +2, +2 until we have a real issue on our hands. And that's why I'm going to unlink you from that. And is this in range? Nope. This is. So now it's going to go in there, and this should fail pretty quickly. So you can see it zipping around in a loop, and pretty soon, if we just right-click, every time it goes around, if I got that config turned off, oh, I have that config changed. But yes, sorry, I forgot I turned off that config when I was setting it up for a tutorial. Normally, each one of these, every time it would go around, it would add +2, so we'd see 31, 33, 35, 37, and so on. But I had the config changed. This is separate from safe mode config. I just changed several configs. And we're just going to remove that. Now, a couple important things to note. While lots of things in this mod have circuit support, this is one I really want to point out. Circuits can read how much entropy is in this, or if it's transferring, it'll read the throughput. And also, if you give a node a redstone signal, it'll refuse to accept. So if I set up our little loop again, where was that? That was here. Oops, I messed that up. I swear I know what I'm doing. If I, let's say, give one a redstone signal, we're going to see that it's going to refuse to accept, and it's just going to stay in there until I remove this redstone signal. Now you might think, why is that useful? Well, the reason is that you can have multiple outputs. So now, if let me put it back in here, and remove you, and we're just going to say, let's say we have 2 roots. This is, again, not a very useful setup, but it's just for demonstration purposes. This lever's off. Every time it shoots the temporal entropy, it splits it between all the outputs. And let's introduce this back to the system. It's splitting between them. If I turn this on, it all goes to this one. Now, this means that because these nodes are quite expensive to craft, and each one in a chain adds +2 temporal entropy, and these sinks have a limit to how much temporal entropy they can handle, and what this all means is when you design your networks to carry temporal entropy to the sink, you want to use as few nodes as possible. And what that means is you may need to design a system to be a little smart about how you handle entropy, right? Like maybe you've got a base set up where at your worst you're making more temporal entropy than one line of nodes can handle, but most of the time you're making less. Like sometimes at its peak you'll be making 50, like let's say 70, but normally you're making 30 and the limit's 64. So you might want to try and use one line of nodes and have some clever circuitry that if you have a surge, you can handle it safely. Now, again, I had it set up so that I could show off these loops in demo mode. Normally a loop like that is a death sentence because each node would add +2 temporal entropy. But I changed that in the config. Okay, let's put this back the way it was. So temporal entropy, pretty simple mechanic, but pretty scary because you can just go wrong. You can just go wrong. Now we're going to show a lot of other things that interact with it. The Chrono Harness is a power source. It actually makes power for free. And it makes a lot of power. In fact, if you set it up right, you can get as much as 800 FE per tick out of it for free. There is, of course, a catch. It produces temporal entropy. In fact, it produces a lot of temporal entropy. And not only that, the more power it's producing, the more temporal entropy it makes. And it will not self-regulate. If you pull out 1,000, it will make as much power as it can to fill its own internal buffer. But its internal buffer is pretty big. So if we draw out 5,000 FE a tick out of this thing, that's going to make temporal entropy faster than we can actually move it. And this thing is just going to instantly explode because it's going to overfill. That would be really bad. So we need to use this power source. We need to be very careful about how fast we pull power out of it. Pull out the power too fast and it's going to explode or fill up with temporal entropy, which is honestly worse most of the time. We can turn it off with a redstone signal, but we just have to be careful. For example, here's an example of something bad. I'm going to put a Leyden jar in here. And now if I flip this lever, I've doomed myself. And the reason is, I've just drained all of the power in this machine. It's got an empty buffer. If I turn it on, it's going to instantly refill its buffer. That's 20,000 FE in one tick. That we cannot handle that much temporal entropy. It's instantly going to fail. If this happens, this specific situation, your only hope is to break this block, fix your setup, and then put it back down. Now, like I said, I've got safe mode enabled, so this won't fail and will just shut off. Right? It didn't break, it just stopped running. But you can see that when it was running, it filled this thing up hugely quickly because it produces a massive amount of power. But the most power you can actually pull out of it safely is 800 FE per tick, and that's if you were to handle every single bit of temporal entropy and you had a dedicated node line that went directly to the sink. So that normally doesn't happen. So high power, low cost, but be very, very careful with it. You need some smart systems around it. Now that was the Chrono Harness. Next up is the Beacon Harness, which again is a very powerful generator, but instead of making FE, it makes beams. And I've got a setup for that over here. This setup is actually a bit more, I'm not going to say it's more complicated than it needs to be. I've seen a lot of very clever Beacon Harness setups. This is a pretty crude one I just hammered together. This is a UI that's very scary, and we're just going to take it by the numbers. So, first of all, Beacon Harness, as the name implies, only works if it's near a beacon. Specifically, it has to be directly under the beacon. If you want, so this is our beacon, it's directly under it, this is fine. If we wanted to, we could do what we've done here, which is use the same beacon for our Entropy Sink and for our Beacon Harness. The Beacon Harness is going to produce temporal entropy while it's running. It doesn't produce a lot, but it does produce it, which is why we've got temporal entropy arcs all over the place, because we've got to get it up to there. Okay? So it produces a massive amount of beam power, pretty much for free, and it produces temporal entropy, but of course there's a trick. There is a trick. The trick is that it actually needs an input. And the input is other beams. So while it's running, it produces a power 512 beam. That is a massive amount of power. You can run, I didn't mean to place that, an awful lot off that. You can usually run your whole base off one or two of these. And to start it, you have to give it a redstone signal, so just a pulse will do. If I forcibly shut this one off, I can show you how to turn it on. Where are we currently inputting into it? Okay, there we go, it's off. And now I can turn it on again by giving it a redstone pulse. And you'll see a massive, after a short period, it goes, whoop, and there's the power output. Now, let's look at what's going on here. First of all, the color of the beam is not constant, it's changing. It's actually changing quite quickly. Oh, this one, oh, did I just place a block? I did not mean to place that block there. That was a mistake. I've just shut it off again. Now, if we look in this UI, the color here is changing. This beam of the color of the beam it's producing, very high power, but the colors are changing. And if we look at the UI, we can see what's coming out. You see this colored ring? I think you can see my mouse. This inner colored ring, it is producing the color on that ring in order. So you see this pointer, it's moving, it's showing you what color it's making. It's currently on the orangish, and it's making orangish. It's getting to tealish green, and it's making like limeish tealish green. So you have to have a system that can handle a very powerful output of a color that's constantly changing, which means you're going to want to do some smart stuff with it. I usually use a prism and like some clockwork stabilizers and some siphons to handle all this, but there are definitely other ways. The other thing is that it needs an input. Like, it doesn't run, this thing needs a beam to be input into it. Now, I'm not quite sure why, but for some reason the beams are not rendering properly. It could be because this is an old world I've updated and these things need to be broken and replaced. It is actually working, it's just their beams are invisible for some reason I'm not clear on. That is very strange. Let me see if I can fix that. Alright, it was just a minor visual bug. I had to break and replace a few things. I'll look into that so that doesn't happen again when people update their worlds. It's just because this was a pre-existing world. Okay, now we can see the beams properly. So while this thing is producing beams of the color it shows on the inner ring, it needs a beam to be input on the color shown on the outer ring. So right now, required input potential, and it even says it here. And when it's in the gray zone, it doesn't care what it gets in. It just runs. So basically what's going on here is it outputs a beam of a color. In an order, it goes in a whole sequence. And it needs a beam of the color that it's not outputting. So when it's outputting purple, which is a mix of red and blue, well, the third primary color is green, and it's not outputting green, you need to put green in. It doesn't care how much green, one is fine. A single power potential beam is absolutely fine. 100 power is fine and overkill, and honestly pretty much a waste. You just need to output some in. If you put in any of the wrong color, let's say it needs potential, aka green, and you put in red, it'll shut off. Like the actual beacon harness will turn off and stop outputting. If you put in a mix of green and something else, like yellowish, like yellow, which is a mix of red and green, that's also no good. It'll shut off. It needs to be the pure color. So this UI shows you at any time what color is it outputting, what color is it expecting. Anytime the color switches that it needs, there's like a safety period, like a grace period, which is shown by gray here, where it doesn't care what the input is. It won't shut off. It'll work fine. You can input nothing. You can input everything. That just gives your machinery a little time to switch over. And other than that, it just makes a massive amount of power. Now this is a pretty inefficient setup. For one thing, we're putting in stronger beams than we need to. We're putting in, what is this, power 13 beams when we only need power 1. It's a waste. But yeah, you can use this as a massively strong power source, but you need a lot of infrastructure to use it properly. Now over here I'm using it to provide a time beam, and we're going to be using that for our next machine, I believe. Yeah, because our next machine, which we're going to show off, is the Temporal Accelerator. I know I'm going out of order in the book, I don't care. The Temporal Accelerator, again, a machine which produces temporal entropy, so be careful about that. And again, a machine which can produce quite a lot of it. There's two versions of this, the normal Temporal Accelerator and the distributed one. We're going to show off the normal one first. And if I place this thing down, and I hold a wrench, you're going to see this whole orange area lit up. This orange area is the area it affects. So if I rotate it around, you can see the area moves with it. And it's just a little visual indicator so you can see what it's going to do. So let's put this one up here. And I'm going to make sure it's not got a time beam going into it yet. We're going to get there. And we're going to point it down. Okay. It's a nice 5 by 5 by 5 area. And this is the area it affects. I've just hollowed it out here. Now, once I give it a time beam, it is going to speed up time in this area. It's going to speed it up for entities, and for blocks, and for tile entities. By default. We can go to this machine and change what it affects. If I can work out whether you... Oh, it's come on, holding space. I need to get closer. Okay. You can actually shift right click this with a wrench to change what it affects. So by default it affects tile entities and blocks in the world. You can shift right click with that with a wrench to make it only do entities or only do like blocks and stuff. Now entities includes me, tile entities and blocks includes things like furnaces, which might cook stuff, or plants growing, for example. So if I put the furnace in the area and I give it a time beam, no wait, I shouldn't do that. I just remembered. See, this is the sort of thing where I said I'm going fast and I'm going to be sloppy, and this is why I've got safe mode. While running, this thing produces temporal entropy. I had not yet connected it so that it would use the temporal entropy. We see what I'm getting at on what I meant by I'm going to be sloppy here? This is one of those times. Now, it's not doing anything yet, and that's because the beam has to go in the back. Not just the side, it has to go in the back. So what I've done here is intentionally wrong, because I put it in the side, and it needs to come in the back. And if I put this down, you should see, there we go, temporal entropy's coming out, and anytime I go in here I get zipped around because there's quite a speed boost in this area. I hope you don't get motion sick, because I'm going to be zipping around quite a lot in this area because I move very, very fast and it can get a little bit hard to control. Now, as you can see when I shift right click this, the current boost is plus 300%, aka everything in this area is running at quadruple speed. That includes this furnace, which I don't know if you can tell, but this furnace is running 4 times as fast as normal. So we can tick accelerate a whole area. Now this also works for things that aren't players. Or like I could put a pig in here, and it just ran out. It just immediately ran out. I could punch it and it would flee out. I could get a bow and like show that the arrows go faster, or snowballs are usually a better example. The snowballs go really fast while they're in the area and then go back to normal once they leave. This includes everything. Like, you know the cooldown, the attack cooldown when you've got a sword? If you look at the indicator under my crossbar, that's refilling 4 times as fast. Everything is sped up in this area. I could change it so that it only does tile entities and blocks, which is usually what you're going to want for your machinery when you don't want to be running around like mad in it. Now, how much of a time boost is it? How much temporal entropy is produced? All the numbers. The stronger the time beam you put in, the more it speeds up time. The more it speeds up time, the more temporal entropy it makes. Right now, we're making 16 temporal entropy per cycle. If we up the power on this time beam, we're probably going to be making like 32 or 64 temporal entropy per cycle. So the more you speed it up, the more you produce. The whole formulas are in the book, as usual. You can put multiple temporal accelerators on an area. They will stack additively. So that's a thing. Another thing to mention is that the temporal accelerator doesn't work on beams, and it doesn't work on things that move temporal entropy. So before you get any clever ideas, like, what if I put a temporal accelerator in a temporal accelerator? It doesn't work. It just goes at normal speed. You can't temporal accelerate things that... You can't tick accelerate tick accelerators. You can't tick accelerate beams. The delay is still 2 game ticks, or 4 game ticks. You can't tick accelerate, like, entropy nodes or anything. They still have a delay of 4 game ticks. But pretty much everything else will be sped up. So these would run at normal speed. Now the distributed version, I did say there was another version of this, is a little bit more interesting. This one affects an entire chunk, and this is a stupid thing to do because it's going to like immediately fill up with temporal entropy if I'm not careful. But I really ought to link this. Now, I know this is dumb. I know I made the mod, but I forget which side the time beam goes in. It's not the top. Honestly, I'm going to write that down. This machine should accept beams from any side. I should write that down. I think it does, actually. I think it just needs more power. So this thing will tick accelerate the entire chunk at once. So if I press F3G, we can see the chunk it's in. This furnace is in a different chunk. This is this one. But as a consequence, it makes way more temporal entropy, and it uses way stronger beam power. So I'm going to like multiply this by 10. So 40 out here, 100 out here. This ought to do something. Now you can see that things are struggling a little, because we're tick accelerating a lot of stuff that normally isn't tick we're using a lot of beam power we don't really have, is basically what's going on here. I'm draining it too fast. Or is that what's going on? What is going on here? It is looking real weird. What is going on here? The thing about tick acceleration is it can get very confusing very quickly because you'll have a setup and you'll have half the setup tick accelerated and not the other half. And it can be a little confusing to tell exactly what is going on here. This thing's struggling, I can tell that. I guarantee you this is all working properly. Like, the mod is working properly. I'm just dumb and I'm unable to understand what is going on. So we're going to move this over to this chunk, which is probably a better idea. That's not what I meant to put down there. So now it's going to tick accelerate this chunk instead. And now, if I put, for example, some cobblestone in here, again, the furnace is tick accelerated. But, oh yeah, this is the other thing. We're in safe mode, remember, so this thing physically cannot break. But look at the amount of temporal entropy in here. It would have exploded ages ago, normally. I've got way too much beam power going in. Like I said, this thing makes a lot of temporal entropy, and you need to be a lot more conservative with just how much power you put into it, because it is designed to affect an entire chunk at once. So let's dial this down a little, see if we can't get this to be a little more normal. Oh my goodness, look at these, they are struggling. Yeah, normally these would have exploded by now, but they've been forced to accept some ridiculous amount of temporal entropy, and they're just struggling. Be careful with tick acceleration, and some weird stuff can happen when you turn on safe mode because stuff that would normally just explode doesn't. Let's do that all again. So from the top, because it can be very confusing to understand what's going on with tick acceleration when tick acceleration is involved, it can just get a little confusing. So again, start from scratch, this time doing it properly, setting up our temporal entropy stuff before we turn it on, always a good idea. Always want to do that first. And we're making sure we're not going to give it a crazy big beam. So let's say this, or we can even turn it down a little bit more, because I'm a little scared of what this is going to do. Now we should be able to do this, and now we're doing something we can actually handle. Nope, no, I'm wrong. This is still too much power. Again, all the formulas are in the book. I suggest you take a look at them, because if you're not careful, you will do this. Like this, if I did not have safe mode on, would have instantly exploded. What's happened here is it's transferred a lot of temporal entropy that they just can't handle. You can see the sparks, which means they're overloading. And so on. Like, normally all of these nodes would have just gone kablooey. And instead, it's trying its best, but it is struggling. So be careful with tick acceleration. It's very easy to get carried away, and you always want to make sure you can handle it before you start using it. Now, of course, there's one last machine, and this is a machine which a lot of people get a little scared about, but it's actually not too bad, and that is the gateway. Now, the gateway's 3 different blocks. There is the gateway controller, the gateway frame, and the endpoint controller. We're just going to show off the normal gateway controller for right now. And this is a bit of a mess. Let's go over to here. Now, this is a multi-block. We build a gateway out of gateway frame. And we can build it pretty much as big as we want. There's a minimum size of 5 by 5, but we can get much bigger. And we do this shape, and then for the top middle, we put the controller in, and we wrench the controller, and this happens. As an example of a bigger one, I'm going to go over here. Now, as we get above a certain size, we actually have to make the walls thicker. Like, if we get big enough, we actually need like 2 thick walls, and then 3 thick walls. All the details are in the book. Odd numbers only. This is normally where I'd cut away to build this, but nah. You can watch me place blocks wrong. That's about the right size, I think. Sure. The size really does not matter. Nope, I got that wrong. That's a 1 thick wall. You can tell because the inner ring of blocks did not get used in the multi-block, so we can just take those away. Once you get these things big enough, I guess an 11 by 11 maybe, you do actually need to make the walls multiple blocks thick, but for this size, apparently 1 block thick is fine. But the size really is mainly a visual thing. So gateways let you make a portal network. And they can go between dimensions, they can make you travel instantly, they can carry entities other than players as well, and you can connect up multiple worlds and multiple dimensions and go all over the place with gateways. So let's say this is my home gateway, and this is a place I want to go to. And I want to teleport from my home gateway to that one. Now, gateways combine a lot of different systems together. So first of all, they're going to produce temporal entropy. So we're going to want to, first of all, because this is always the first thing you should handle when you're dealing with a machine that makes temporal entropy, is make sure you hook up the stuff to take away the temporal entropy, because if safe mode weren't on, you'd be real concerned about it. And we're right-clicking on the controller specifically, is the core of this block, of this multi-block. So that's the temporal entropy handled. Next thing we need to know is the address. Every gateway has an address. I can right-click this and it'll tell me, with my omnimeter, address of this, expansion, equilibrium, charge, expansion. Now, that's the sort of thing you want to write down. But we don't want to know the address of this gateway, we want to know the address of this gateway. We already know where we started from. We need to connect this gateway to that one. So we need the address of this gateway. Your address is time, expansion, rift, time. And I'm going to write that down. Time, expansion, rift, time. I literally did just write that down. Like every time a gateway is made, it gets a random address and they're always unique. So there's no predicting them. Okay, so we need to dial this gateway to that. Well, this is going to involve beams and rotary and circuits. Not even kidding. Okay, let's start building. Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to work out how do we dial it. Well, you see this big wheel with all the weird symbols on it? This wheel spins. And you see this triangle? This is like our pointer. So if we're going to dial time, expansion, rift, time, first we want to select time, then we want to select expansion, then we want to select rift, and then we want to select time again. Now, those names are all beam alignment names. Remember our color chart? If we get confused about which one is which, we can just look it up in a color chart. Time is orange. I'm going to guess that this orange symbol is going to be the time, and it is. So this is something I'm going to use a redstone master axis for, because this is the sort of thing you want a redstone master axis for. I'm also going to note that the gateway controller has an I value of 0. That's real convenient. That means I can use Show Gears for this. Thank goodness. And now the best way to spin something is to use rotary. So we're going to do that. Now, if I want to get to time, that is 1, 2, 3 like settings away, right? 1, 2, 3. That's the third one. So 3 pi, 3 times 3 over 8 times 2 pi. Did I do that wrong? What did I type? Oops. What did I type in? There we go. Okay, I should explain what I just typed in there, because you're probably a bit confused. What did I type in that I just magically dialed to time? This wheel's going to rotate, and just like the beam cannon we saw in the previous video, it's going to turn to the angle equal to the speed we put in radians. So if I want this thing to turn 3/8 of the way around, and 1 full rotation is 2 pi radians, that's just math for you, then 2 pi radians per second times 3/8 should give me the speed to select time. This is, by the way, one of those machines where you're going to want to use a sequencer because you don't want to have to type this in every time. You just want to be able to put it into a sequencer once. Okay, we've selected time. Have we? Not quite. We now need to lock that in. Okay, well, the way we do that is with a beam. Now, you don't need a time beam for this. You can use any beam. So I need to hit this thing with a single pulse of any beam. And I'm doing this manually because this is a demo. So if I put 1 glowstone dust in here, multiple things are going to happen. Wheels turning, and we see a time icon is locked in there. We've locked in time as the first part of the address. And the wheel's reset. The wheel is reset all the way to where it was at the beginning. Now, you can use any beam for this. There is a config option, if you're a masochist, to turn on gateway hard mode, where the beam alignment has to match the name of the thing you're dialing to. So if you're trying to dial time, it has to be a time beam. If you're trying to dial charge, it has to be a charge beam, and so on. But by default, it's just any beam will do. Okay, time's in. Next up, we need expansion. Well, which symbol's expansion? This one. Same color as expansion and a symbol of things expanding outwards. Alright, let's get to it. Well, we actually need to do some addition here because the wheel's reset, but this gear is still spinning. So why isn't it still at time? The problem is the reference point has changed. If we make this thing stop spinning now, wheel's going to go all over the place. The problem is, once we dial in a thing, all the speeds are defined relative to that point now. So now, whatever we would have dialed in before, we need to add this value to it. Don't worry, with circuitry, this can all be done automatically. There's no point where you should, if you're doing it automatically, where you would never ever need to get out like a pen and paper and start doing sums. You can make circuits do it for you. Also, you can, if you attach a circuit to this controller, like a reader circuit, it'll tell you what speed it's defined relative to. Or am I? No, I'm misremembering something. This does the number of chevrons dialed. Sorry, this is a different thing. So yeah, you can do this all in circuits. You can like totally set up a circuit thing where it's like, oh, I want to dial time expansion rift time. All right, well 1359 or whatever. You just like have some circuit thing and it does all the where you just put in the one you want and it'll just dial it for you when you hit the button and it'll do all the math for you. That's a thing I suggest you build if you have a big gateway hub, like if you have one at your base and you want to go around everywhere from your base. I suggest building a big complex system to handle it all for you. But hey, we've dialed in time. Expansion's up next. What's that? So we're -2 off, so because it's 2 the other direction. So if I just do 1 here, ta-da! And we can tell that this is expansion we've selected because when I right-click it, it says in square brackets expansion. Right? That's the thing we've currently got selected, and we're about to dial that in. And again, the wheel turns and expansion's in there. Rift, that's the next one. That's down here, purple, swirly rifty symbol. Let's add 4. Okay. Glowstone dust again. That's 3. That's the third one. And now we're back to time again. 1, 2, 3. So if I just put in 8. Alright, now when I do this, this should finally link us to that gateway because we're about to dial in the address of that gateway. Let's do it. And it has. Voila! And you can see that gateway has also activated. Now you know how we can see the address we've dialed to on these 4 corners? Similarly, this one has lit up on the 4 corners, and that's the address of this gateway. Okay, so this linking is bidirectional. We're also producing temporal entropy, just continuously. But only at this gateway, not this gateway. Only the gateway that started the connection has to handle the temporal entropy. Now, if we just walk through, we come out the other one. And we can go back. We maintain like our rotation and everything. If we go in like the top of this gateway, we'll come out the top of the other one. If we go in the bottom of this one, we'll go out the bottom of the other one, and everything like that. We can throw items through. Yep, and it came out the other end. There we are. Back it goes, and here it is. And when we're ready to dial something else, we can break the connection by just sending it another beam pulse and it'll break the connection. Now there's another variant of this, another variant of these gateways, where we use a destination gateway. Now a destination gateway is a much, much simpler version of the gateway. In fact, the only thing it inputs or outputs is a redstone signal. You give it a redstone pulse and it does a thing. So I'll show you that in a moment. Actually, it's called an endpoint gateway. Sorry, not a destination gateway. So we use an endpoint controller instead of a normal controller. And here we go. And you can see this is a much simpler looking model. We're missing the big dialing wheel in the middle. We're missing the pointer. It's much simpler. This one has an address. We can get it. Rift, 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 charge. Lots of duplicates in that one. So now we're going to dial to that one. So let's do that. So rift charge. So we're going to go to 4. Well, the good news is there's a lot of duplicates, so this is quite simple. Rift. And again, I'd like to remind you that this would be a good thing to have circuitry to do all the math for you, so you can just dial into places with the press of one button. And this is again a good use for sequencers. Oh, I misclicked. Go in. Go. What was the last one? Charge. Charge is a little lightning bolt symbol, so 2 over. And voila. And again, we can teleport through. But we can't start the link here, right? There's no dialing wheel. But we're not entirely trapped. If we can give this controller on this one a redstone. Hold on, I should say that again. Now let's say I'm over here. I've gone through this portal, and I'm on this over here. This could be a million miles away, and the portal closes. Someone, I don't know who else is on. This is a server. Someone else uses my portal. I don't really know. I'm making up a scenario. Anyway, they use the portal. It shuts down. They connect to, let's say they link to that one or something. Oh no, I'm trapped. I have no way to dial my endpoint. Well, that's not entirely true. If you hit the button, if you give a redstone signal to the controller on an endpoint gateway, it automatically dials back instantly to the place it was last connected to. So now I can just return home. As easy as that. And it makes the other gateway handle the entropy, because endpoint gateways don't do temporal entropy. The reason I'm mentioning this is that this lets you do something quite useful. If I get some wool and I can show this off. Let's say, because making a whole circuit system and a thing to handle dialing with beams and everything, and a thing to handle the temporal entropy, is kind of a big deal. It takes a while, it's a big setup, and you don't want to have to do that at every single place you have a gateway. So what if you don't? What if you only have one? So let's say this green wool represents your big central gateway. It's at the center of your base. It's got a whole all the bells and whistles. You've got a whole dialing system with circuitry and whatnot. And then over here's the gateway in the end, and here's a gateway at your mob farm, and here's an endpoint gateway somewhere else. Now, let's say you want to use this as your hub. You say, oh, I'm at my base. I want to go to my mob farm. Well, let me press the button I've got set up with my whole circuit system that'll dial the mob farm, and I can go there. And now I can teleport to the mob farm, and I can teleport back from the mob farm to the base. And then I say, okay, I'm gonna go to the nether, so I do that, all right? And then I can go back. And at any point, if I say I find myself over here, let's say I find myself in the end, this is an endpoint gateway. I can still go back to my base because the only gateway it's ever connected to is my base. I can just press the button that press a button. There's just a simple button like with that endpoint gateway over there, and it will take me back to my base. So if you want, you can have a whole network of gateways and only need one central, normal gateway with a whole dialing system and everything, and all the others are just destinations or endpoint gateways. So that's gateways. They can be really quite handy if you've got a big spread out world. You can also use them for item transport and stuff, or as a way to teleport items, because you can throw items through them automatic if you want to. Or send a minecart through them or something. Entities can go through them, so I could take a pig and do that. I'm not sure how I'm going to convince the pig to walk through, I'm going to be honest. Pig, I need you to do science for me. There we go. That worked. And so on and so forth. So those are gateways. And that is Technomancy, wrapped up, I believe. Alright, yes, that is everything. I hope you found that informative. We finally finished the last of these videos. I really hope you enjoy the mod. This video is an hour long. Technomancy has some real complex stuff in it, and I had to talk for quite a while. Alright, well, that's everything in the mod. We've covered everything in its entirety. There should be no features you should be concerned about. If the mod updates and it's not in one of these videos, look in the book, which is always the most up-to-date and reliable source of information. Anyway, goodbye, and have fun with the mod.